r/AskReddit. HumanLechi8619 says, what's a family secret you found out as an adult that completely shocked you? Raigu says, my uncle had essentially a secret family in the 60s. He was about to deploy to Vietnam. My grandma was pretty racist. He met a nice Mexican lady on base. They got married. He knocked her up. He went to Vietnam. She divorced him while he was gone because she couldn't handle the separation. He signed up for another tour of duty after that because he was heartbroken. When he came back, she had remarried and been raising their kid with this new guy. Kid had never known him. Everyone seemed happy, so he walked away. Told no one. Then in 2017 or so, when he was in his 70s and was on his third, okay actually fourth, if you count that secret one, marriage, and his last adult child had moved out of the house, this middle-aged Mexican lady shows up to his front door and is like, hey, I think you're my dad. This happened during a family BBQ. My uncle looked at her for a minute and asked, Mariah? She said, that's me. He said, come on out back, dogs are already on the grill. So that's how I met my much older cousin I didn't know existed. Her mom and dad who raised her had both died a couple years previously. Her mom, on her deathbed, literally said, so your dad wasn't actually the dude who made you. It took her a couple years to decide to seek him out. Her only question was, why didn't you ever come around? He just shrugged and said, your mom told me not to, and you had a good family, why would I ruin that? She now lives next door to him. Zbignich says, that's sweet. John JDM says, I'm so glad this had a nice result. Minor Miss Ipswich 2 says, my great grandpa went to war from the British Royal Navy and stole a Canadian's identity to come to the US. Got Muffins says, Canadian draper. Intelligent Prize 486 says, whoa, this is a great one. Ice8 says, this was never a secret, but I learned at my grandpa's funeral that he won a Pulitzer Prize. It was from 31 years before I was born, so I guess by the time I came along, it was old news and everyone was sick of hearing about it, and he was always very humble about his career. Mark Sivapor says, when info like this is casually mentioned, and I'm like, what? My parents insist they told me, but I just wasn't paying attention. Plausible, I'm a late diagnosis but I'm 10,000% sure all the stories were old news by the time I was born. Libanana Hammock says, my husband's family is like this with him, lol. Wait, you were arrested once. Why didn't you ever tell me? You didn't ask. Wait, you were married before. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked. What? Sufficient Step 6954 says, no joke, my grandfather accidentally mutilated and almost lost his thing trying to masturbate with a vacuum cleaner. Weird thing to find out in your 20s. Edit, so I don't have to answer the question again. This happened after he was a grandfather and done having kids. It happened when I was a teenager about 30 years ago. Champagna for Merialfa says, I have so many questions. Was this after he had as many children as he was going to have? Does your entire family know about this? Sufficient Step 6954 says, yes, it happened in the 90s when I was a teenager, so all of his kids would have been in their 30s by then. It was a secret for a long time, but I don't like my dad or his side of the family, so I thought it was funny and told my siblings and cousins. I don't know many details, just that my grandmother came home to find him bleeding out. Apparently the suction was really strong on the attachment and kinda popped his thing head. Unhelpful Bullfrog says, not an adult, but I found out I was adopted at 13 completely accidentally by finding a document with my last name listed different. That was fun. Edit, I didn't realize I would get so many comments. I thought this would get buried. I made a longer comment down below with more context. Spleenbugler says, my great-grandfather had a somewhat similar story. He was around 30 when he discovered that A, his mom was actually his aunt, B, his genetic mom was still back in Ukraine, and C, she was buried there because the Soviets had starved her and the rest of the family to death 5 years earlier. Unhelpful Bullfrog says, holy wow, I hope your family has been able to find peace after so much tragedy. Thea Thurjeff says, the motorcycle I bought with my own money at age 17 didn't stop working on its own. My dad secretly pulled some wires out so it wouldn't work anymore. I found out many years later when my brother told me. KimiWex 1972 says, do you know why? I assume it's because motorcycles are dangerous and he didn't want you to die at 17. Thea Thurjeff says, he had been yelling at me for driving too fast away from the house after an argument. Claimed the kids in the neighborhood were at risk. I was the youngest person in our very rural neighborhood. Neighbors were all a mile apart from each other. If you ask me, he just wanted to maintain control as we live so far outside of town and I would need the car he bought for me, with strings attached, for transportation. Pegleg J says, that my granddad suffered severe PTSD from serving in WW2 and the lovely old man I knew was actually a vile nightmare to live with for my mum and her siblings. I only learned years after his death that he basically lived on uppers and downers. Valium to sleep at night, amphetamines during the day. Rushoth 2946 says, minus the drugs, I think my grandfather was a tyrant to his kids when he was around. Not the guy I knew, he was mellowed by then, but he was always distant. Grandma handled us when we were around, and she was lovely, but also she was very different when she was younger. I was 18 or so when I asked him what he did in WW2, as I had no knowledge he served until someone mentioned it off the cuff. His response, I killed Germans, he said angrily. I never asked again. But in my research I think I have pieced it mostly together. He was a recon/scout in Patton's 3rd Army as they marched across France into Germany and beyond. r/AskReddit. The official goddess says, what's your idea of the perfect first date? Iljeffa Turdberger says, I'd have to say April 25th. Because it's not too hot, not too cold, all you need is a light jacket. Mr. Snark says, January 1st. I might be Weasel says, I'm bad at dates. I want to skip straight to the stage, where we can sit around in our pajamas watching movies. I am Gaz says, he made reservations at a really posh restaurant, and when we got there, someone had messed up and booked it for the next night. He was so defeated and kept apologizing that he didn't want our first date to be such a disaster and asked me if I wanted him to take me home and go back the next day. I wasn't there because of where we were. I was there for his company, so we wound up walking around all night talking and ended up eating greasy burgers from a food truck on the beach. 3 years later I said yes. Stained Glass Candle says, okay, hear me out. I would fall in love if someone took me to stand-up comedy for a first date. I love laughing and being silly. I think it's when I'm most myself, and a couple bonds most deeply when they are having fun together. Slavic Gypsigeral says, any date I can wear a bikini to and be in water on. Badger 031973 says, back in the day it was both of us walking away from the first date thinking about how much we'd each like a second. Happy Peaceful Bliss says, anything that allows you to talk. Why the heck do people want to take their first date out to a movie or a show? You won't get to know them that way. Loveylet 911 says, dating is supposed to be a fun social activity singles engage in while getting to know each other better. Usually if either party walks away not feeling Like they had a great time, it's unlikely there will be a second date. The biggest difference between two people hanging out and a date is a date has romantic intentions. Mutual attraction, chemistry, similar humor, compatibility, and shared values are what people are looking for. A great first date usually entails some playful flirtatious banter, compliments, sexual innuendo if the right opportunity presents itself, holding hands while driving/walking, incidental touching while talking/laughing, a brief discussion about the dating scene, what each looks for, lingering eye contact, sly smiles, your favorite this/that on a variety of things, and ending with a hug and kiss goodbye or possibly more. Any date which comes across like a boring job interview or discussing generic platonic topics for hours can sometimes con certain people into believing they had a great date up until the other person texts them the following: "I really enjoyed meeting/getting to know you. However, I don't believe there were any sparks." Each of us is entitled to have our own mate selection screening process and must-haves list. Each of us is entitled to have our own red flags, boundaries, and deal breakers. Most people you meet don't become dates, most dates don't become relationships, and most relationships don't lead to marriage. As one adage goes, many are called but few are chosen. In a world with over 8 billion people, rejection just means next. Never allow waiting to become a habit. Live your dreams and take risks. Life is happening now. /Paulo Coelho. If someone wants you in their life, they'll make room for you. You shouldn't have to fight for a spot. /Unknown. Every time I thought I was being rejected from something good, I was actually being redirected to something better. /Steve Mirabile. Dating is primarily a numbers game. People usually go through a lot of people to find good relationships. That's just the way it is. /Henry Cloud. Corsedruff12 says, "Where you can sit someplace quiet and get to know each other. I remember it like it was yesterday, but was 1992. I think we talked for like 3 to 4 hours." Theguyinit says, 19700101. It's the Unix epoch in IMMDD format, which is great, because sorting in this format also sorts chronologically. Plus, being the epoch, you can use this date as sort of a test for invalid date fields in a variety of systems. Comfort says, "Something that involves food for sure lol." Silithabani says, "Some sort of competition, where a series of physical and mental challenges are present to her numerous suitors. At the end of the game, the winner takes her out to dinner." That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.